Welcome to Washington State Legends of Soccer and our series, Why History Matters. I'm Frank MacDonald. Today, our guest is Grant Wahl. Grant is recognized as one of the world's best soccer journalists. He's covered the game for Sports Illustrated for 25 years and 12 World Cups, both men and women's. He's also authored 2 books, including the bestseller, The Beckham Experiment. You can now read his coverage at grantwahl.com, find his Futbol with Grant Wahl podcast, and follow him on Twitter at Grant Wahl. Welcome, Grant.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to talk to you, Frank.
All right. Hey, I know you have a great perspective on the MLS era of soccer in the United States, and you also have a tangential bygone tie to our area. Can you tell us quickly about your stay in Seattle?
I lived in Seattle from 2000 to 2004. My wife, Celine Gounder, who's a doctor now, went to medical school at the University of Washington and really enjoyed both of us living there for 4 years and getting to know people. And the only thing that's a little unfortunate for me, I guess, is I left before the MLS Sounders started. And so they were certainly around. But I think since I left, soccer has become even more popular in Seattle than it already was. And it was popular even before.
Yeah. Well, I never ran into you until, I would read all your writing, of course, but the first time I remember we had a conversation, it was that preceded that first MLS Sounders Timbers matchup, and I remember I had, as a kid, I'd remembered the Sports Illustrated 1975 Sounders Timbers article, and so I think I told you about that. But before 2011, how much history about MLS ever made it into your stories on league teams and rivalries and such?
Yeah, I mean, I've been a professional soccer journalist since 1996. So, that was the first year of MLS. And so I think it's kind of a neat tie-in that I started my career the same year the league started. So I've been able to see where things have come from over the years with MLS and just the sheer number of teams there are now. And, I can remember when MLS went down to 10 teams and contracted to teams in Florida back in 2001. So this was a league that at that point in time looked like it might not make it. And to see where it is now and all the teams that have been added, including the Sounders, including the Portland Timbers, and to, be at the point now where we're at 28 MLS teams this season, it's night and day,
Yeah.
And I've been to all but probably, I think, 5 MLS finals over the years. And so just being able to have context and perspective on that growth over the years and all the people that have been involved in it is something I'm really proud of and have really treasured getting to meet all those folks.
Yeah. So what we mentioned in your podcast, you had a very interesting SI throwback podcast. I think it was 2015. I know it was in advance. Was it 2015?
2019 on the Women's World Cup origin story.
Okay. It was 20. Okay. And specifically, and you even covered the lead up to that 91 tournament. Do you remember, was there something, had you heard a couple stories? What was the inspiration for undertaking that?
Well, back in 2019, I knew that Sports Illustrated wanted to do a narrative podcast series on something connected to the women's soccer and the U.S. women's national team. And at first, it was suggested to me that I do something on the 99 Women's World Cup. And I get why that was suggested. But my response after thinking about it for a while was, I think there's a lot that's known about the 99 Women's World Cup. It was this transformational cultural event, and movies have been made about it over the years. And so I felt like one thing that even as a soccer person, I didn't know that much about was the 1991 Women's World Cup, the very first one that FIFA organized, that the US team did win in China, and it included teenage players like Mia Hamm and Julie Foudy and Christine Lilly, and also Michelle Akers, who was the player, probably the best player in that tournament. And yet it wasn't 99 by any means in terms of how it was covered, how many people in the US were even aware of it. And so for me, that was fascinating to go back and interview the people who were involved with it, including ones who are not on the 99 team, maybe some who the 91 World Cup was their high point. And so to be able to tell that story over several episodes was interesting. And then also to tell the origin story of how the FIFA Women's World Cup got started in the first place. I even got Sepp Blatter, the former FIFA president, to do an interview for it, because I knew that he would be interested in talking about it, because he sort of credits himself as being the one who got the Women's World Cup started at FIFA, whether or not that's true. And I certainly asked him about some of the things he had said over the years about women's soccer, which were pretty sexist, but he did do some positive things actually for women's soccer, at least to get things going and take FIFA from the dark ages to a place that at least had women's tournaments. So that was just a really interesting project all around.
Oh, I ate it up, and it was because, I mean, I got, if I'm provincial, 4 of the players on that team were from Washington, including, you mentioned Michelle, but Shannon Higgins, who is kind of the catalyst in midfield. How much had you gotten to see those two play, or that team play? Or in the case of Higgins, was it mostly on video or YouTube?
Yeah, I mean, I was able to watch Michelle Akers. She played longer for the U.S. women's national team, and it was still very influential in the '99 World Cup. But Shannon Higgins, Swarovski, is a player who had a big impact on winning the World Cup in '91. And it was important for me to talk to her as well, because she was an example of a player who retired as a player soon after winning the World Cup in '91, not because she wanted to, but because she didn't have any income. And she decided to take a coaching job and not to continue playing with the national team, because in those days, it was impossible to make a living as a professional soccer player in the United States, even if you were winning World Cups. And they would get per diems of $5, $10 from US Soccer. And so it is unfortunate, I think, that Shannon Higgins stopped playing at such an early age in her 20s, simply for that reason.
Yeah, I'm gonna come back to that, but okay, so leading up to it, I think you touched on well, there were paper teams that never played anyone, and then Mike Ryan finally got to take a team over to Italy on pretty short notice. Do you recall that transition from Ryan and to Anson, and how it shifted the program's trajectory and its just the look and feel of it?
Ryan was from the Pacific Northwest, wasn't he? Seattle area? Yeah. And so he had that very first official U.S. team that included Michelle Akers, that played over in Italy. And I think there's a bit of a misnomer, or at least a misunderstanding. I think even some people in the soccer community think that from the very moment the U.S. women's national team started, that they were the best team in the world. And they weren't. They had some good players and they competed, but it took a few years into the late 80s for them to actually become a contender to win that first Women's World Cup in '91. And that came under Anson Dorrance, who had so much success at the University of North Carolina even by then, and just had this total college juggernaut. And several of his players were on the U.S. women's national team. So there was a huge Carolina influence on those early U.S. women's teams. And there were always exceptions, like Michelle Akers and Julie Foudy, Brandy Chastain, who didn't go to Carolina. But at times, the majority of the players on the national team were UNC players.
Yeah. And then you mentioned actually so it was Lori Henry, Amy Allman now, and Shannon were with Michelle on that team. And the funny thing is they came home to a reception here. It was over on Mercer Island, and the three, aside from Akers, retired on the spot. I mean, they hadn't even recovered from jet lag. I think it was held on like Christmas Eve or something. And I thought, wow, I mean, they knew they were done and they were going to move on. At the time of that, well, first I'd say, do you think we lost a generation, or we lost out on the development of that team? We didn't win it in '95. What did we lose by having no compensation back then for women?
Well, I just have so much admiration for the women, including the stars of those U.S. teams who persevered and kept playing internationally, because it was really hard in terms of just such little money coming in, and U.S. soccer not really doing much for them. And so I also think about that in even today in other countries. We're at a different stage now in the United States, and we have Title IX, and we have so many college scholarship opportunities for women soccer players, but it's still in probably the majority of countries in the world, very hard for women to play soccer. And in some cases, they just don't in some countries. And in others, it's not something you can really make into a professional thing that you do. So we are in a better spot here now in the US, and it feels like the NWSL is here to stay, and the college system is still doing quite well.
Did you think it would did you think they would arrive at the CBA that they have by 2022 when you did that podcast? Or did you think it's a long ways out?
I felt like progress had been made, and the lawsuits between the U.S. women's national team players and U.S. soccer did go on for several years, to the point where I think U.S. soccer had so many lawsuits at the same time. You had to wonder, like, when are they going to get out from under this stuff? And also, why is U.S. soccer getting sued so much, including by their own foundation? But there's lots of reasons for that. But it's very clear that when Cindy Parlow-Cone came into the presidency of U.S. soccer, she wanted to get rid of the lawsuits and find solutions in ways that her predecessors maybe didn't. And I have a lot of respect for how she got those things done, including this CBA with the U.S. women's team, also with the men's team, and a historic situation in which the men's team and women's team have agreed to pool together all World Cup prize money and share it equally.
Yeah. Before we let you go, just a couple questions going back to MLS. You're in Spain today, but you're usually in New York, and we're tucked up here in the Northwest. The Seattle and Portland fandom, I think it more than gets its due with national TV games. Your thoughts on, will the audience ever tire of that rivalry? And or are we just waiting for the other rivalries such as El Tráfico to catch up?
I'm never going to get tired of the Seattle-Portland rivalry, and I don't think many soccer fans are, because it's real. It's got so much history at this point, and I love the fact that I know a lot of what that history is now, having interviewed people involved on both sides of it over the years, and it just feels special, feels real. And I think we're seeing other rivalries build, but stuff like that takes time. And so, because of the rich history that Portland and Seattle have had in the rivalry, going back to the NASL days, back, before I was born, it just feels like one of the great rivalries. And I can't think of a reason that I would ever not be interested in watching that. And MLS doesn't really have much of a national football, despite all the growth. And yet that's one thing that I think the soccer nation understands, is Seattle, Portland.
And just one last thing. So the current powers that be, the leagues, the federation, what do they do enough to protect or to emphasize American soccer, their part in history, or tell me what your take on that is?
Um, in terms of what U.S. soccer does to preserve its history?
Or just amplify it or lift it up, and or maybe the journalism world is now taken the mantle of that. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it was obviously tragic, I think, when the Soccer Hall of Fame in Oneonta, New York, shut down. And so for many years, you had so much of their stuff in storage in, I think, Hillsborough, North Carolina. And so to see a new National Soccer Hall of Fame be established in Frisco, Texas, and I've been there, and I think it's very good. I wish it was a little bigger, but I like that it's there. And I think the process of which I'm part of the National Soccer Hall of Fame induction has gotten better over the years with some of the changes they've made in that process. And I do think, we have some historians who just, for the love of that, do it. And we also have some really terrific journalists who have done work in that. A friend of mine, Pablo Maurer from The Athletic, has done some terrific historical magazine stories about a number of things in U.S. soccer, and I love everything he does. I've done some of that stuff. We're starting to see more documentary films on soccer in the history of soccer in the U.S. come out, and I'm happy to be a part of some of that. I'm part of the production and the interviewees for an upcoming 3-part documentary series on the U.S.-Mexico soccer rivalry coming out on Amazon in November. And another documentary film that CBS is doing on the U.S. men's national team, sort of dark years from 1950 to 1990, when they never qualified for the World Cup.
Wow. I have not heard about those.
Yeah, so these are things that, there's a neat Brian Ascuri documentary that came out on CBS not too long ago. So a lot of things that either haven't been covered historically, or things that I remember covering but haven't been done in full detail are being addressed now. So I'm excited about that.
It's cool. It sounds more organic too. It wasn't a pitch. It doesn't sound like that got those started. That's great. Hey, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. Grant, thank you so much for sharing these stories, for all the stories you've given us over the years, and I'm sure more to come. And people can continue to read at grantwahl.com. Thanks to our producer today, Leanne Johnson. Thanks to you all for watching our Why History Matters series. For more on the history of Washington State soccer and to learn more about Washington State Legends of Soccer, go to wasoccerlegends.org. We appreciate your support, and we'll see you next time.